Masechet Baba Batra, Daf Kof Bet. We were talking about the architecture of these catacombs, and now we're going to apply that knowledge to the following Mishnah. Tenan Hatam, Hamose met mushkav kedarko, notlo ve'et tefusato, Shenayim notlan ve'et tefusatan. This is a Mishnah from the end of Masechet Nazir that says, if you find a corpse in the ground, maybe you have a field and you're digging it up for whatever purpose, and you happen to find a corpse. And you, as the farmer, would rather it not be there because you want to farm the entire land, or especially if you want to do things that require tahara. Maybe you're a kohen and you're going to prepare tirumah there, or for whatever reason you want it to be tahor, then especially you don't want a corpse to be there. And so you would like to move it away and take it to a proper cemetery. Are you allowed to do so? So the answer is, depends. If you find just one corpse and it's lying in the normal way that Jewish corpses are buried, then one is permitted to move it. You have to take along with it tefusato, meaning the surrounding earth, the surrounding dirt. And that's because the surrounding dirt also can be part of the fluids, the body, the cells of the corpse as it decomposed. So part of the surrounding earth has to go together with bones and whatever is left there. So you have to move all of that, and you can move it if you find just one. And the same is true if you find two, because that means if there's only one or two there, then probably this was not designated as a cemetery, this area. It's just that someone happened to die there, and for whatever reason, they were in a rush and they couldn't bring it to proper burial. So this is considered a temporary burial, and maybe whoever put the body there was thinking that they're going to come back in a few days and put it in a proper burial. For whatever reason, they didn't. We don't know the circumstances, but the point is, since it's only one or two, this is not called a cemetery, and one can move it. However, Masa Shelosha, im yesh benehen me'arba ad shemone, hare zo shechunat kebarot, ubodek menu ulhalan asrim ama. If one finds three bodies near each other, well then you have to suspect that it is in fact a cemetery. But we have to check something further. What is the distance between each of these corpses? If it's between 4 amot and 8 amot, then you designate it. That means this is designated as a cemetery. All these are part of a chamber, one of the chambers that we were describing yesterday. And then you have to assume that this is a chamber, and then we have to look for other chambers that might be nearby, because remember, they were built as double chambers, or sometimes even 4 altogether. And you have to check 20 amot radius around those corpses. Now, why between 4 and 8? The idea is as follows. If we remember last time what these looked like, so the shortest side that it can be is 4. According to Tanakama, the chambers themselves are 4 on this side and 6 on this side. So if you find 3 corpses within 4, well, that's 2 close together, and that means this was not buried in a standard way, in a standard chamber. It means this was a temporary burial, even for 3, that they were put so close to each other, and therefore one can remove even those 3 because they're too close to each other. If they're farther apart, then it's possible that the 3 were over here, right? If they're more than 4 away from each other. So because on the 4 side, you can only fit 2 of them. So then that anything less than 4 certainly will not be good, because 3 of them within 4 is too close together. On the upper side is 8. Well, the 8 we find over here in the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. And so in the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, if one finds 3 and they're more than 8 apart, well then they cannot be from the same chamber, because the farthest away they can be is 8, right? If you have 1 here all the way on this side, and then it could be that you found the other one more than 8. Well, then that would be like, over here. So then those can't be part of the same chamber, and therefore they are not, again, a proper normal burial. It must be that these are placed haphazardly. They're too far apart. However, between 4 and 8, then it could be that this was between 4 and 8 amot. It could be that they are 3 together, like over here, or it could be that 8, less than 8. It could be that one's all the way on one side and one's all the way on the other side of this 8 amma side. So, but that's the maximum it could be, and this is the minimum it can be. Now, we're going to have to ask, the Gemara will ask, well, you said between 4 and 8, well, which opinion are we following? You see, if we follow Tanakama, then the minimum should be 4, and the maximum should be 6, because that's the maximum that they can be together. Anything more than 6 away from each other, meaning you're finding 3 of them, if any 2 of those 3 that you find are more than 6 amot away from each other, then obviously they are not from a single chamber, and therefore they don't make a proper burial, a proper cemetery. So either the Mishnah should say the minimum is 4 and the maximum is 6, or if it's following Rabbi Shimon, then it should say the minimum is 6, which is the short side, and 8 is the long side. And so that anything less than 6 is already too close together, and anything more than 8 is too far apart from each other. So where'd you get 4 and 8? It sounds like 4 is coming from Tanakama and 8 is coming from Rabbi Shimon, which doesn't make any sense. You can't mix and match these opinions. Okay, the Gemara will ask that, and we'll conclude that actually there's another version of Rabbi Shimon, although we learned the version of Rabbi Shimon that says 6 by 8. There is in fact another version. Okay, so far so good. So that explains the beginning. Now, Masa echad besof 20 amma, bodek b'menu ulhalan 20 amma she'raglaim ladavar. So now follow up to the last law. So we just learned that if one does find 3 corpses and they are between 4 and 8 amot apart, then that area is going to be designated, in fact, as a proper cemetery, and you have to leave those corpses there. But then we also want to check around it. Maybe there are other chambers that are nearby. If this is all from one chamber, then it's very likely that there are other chambers nearby. And so we have to check 20 amot in each direction from those 3 corpses. Now, what if one does find something within a 20 amma radius of those first 3 bodies? If you find even one corpse there in any of that area, then that becomes a new starting point, and you have to check from that one 20 amot in every area. Because raglaim ladavad, it makes sense. This is support for the fact that if there's something, if there's already 3 in one spot in the proper ratio between 4 and 8, so there's certainly a 1 chamber here, and then we find one more, let's say 19 amot away. Well, then from there you have to check again, because since we already found 1 chamber, it's likely that there is another chamber somewhere in the area. Now, if you check 20 and there's nothing else, okay, there's nothing else. 20 is the max that the next chamber where it could be. But if you do find another one, then it makes sense that there is some other chamber nearby, but we have to keep checking a little bit further on. Now, this Mishnah notes an irony that even though, let's say you found that one that's 19 away, let's say you found it first. If you found it first before the 3 that are together, then you'd be able to take that one away. That's the beginning of this Mishnah that said that if you find one alone, then you can move it along with the dirt with it. So it's true, if you had found it alone first, then you'd be able to take it away. But that's not the order you found it in. If you find the 3 together first, once you establish that there is a chamber here, and then you find another one, well, then you can't simply take it away. You have to check from there further on, and so you have to continue the investigation. All right, that's the Mishnah. Now here's its relevance for us. Amar mod me'arba ve'ad shemoneh. Mane Rabbanan ha'amri arba amot al shesh. Rabbi Shimon ha'amar shesh al shemoneh. The author of the Mishnah said between 4 and 8. So that 4, if it's more than 3 or more corpses within 4 amot, that's too close together. And if 8 is the maximum side, and so if they're far apart, more than 8, then they cannot be from the same side. So who is the author of this Mishnah? If it's Rabbanan said that the shortest side is 4, that's good. But he said the longer side of the chamber is 6. So you don't need to go all the way up to 8. So it can't be Rabbanan. And if it's Rabbi Shimon, he said that the chamber is 6 by 8. So the maximum makes sense, but the minimum should be 6. So who can be the author of this Mishnah? and Nazir? And the answer is Le'olam Rabbi Shimon hi. We're going to follow Rabbi Shimon. V'aytanahu detanya mesa'an re'sufin ve'en benehen me'arba amot ad shemone yesh len tefusa ve'en lahem shechunat kebarot. For the Tanakama of this Baraita teaches that if one finds 3 corpses near each other and the distance between them is not the usual, and the usual is between 4 and 8. So if it is that they're all between 4 and 8 apart, then that's a normal crypt, and we assume that this is a chamber, it's a permanent place, and you cannot move them. However, if the distance between them is not between 4 and 8, meaning it's less than 4 or more than 8, then this is not considered a cemetery. And so they will have the law of the surrounding earth so that you can move them, but you have to move the surrounding earth together with them. And this is not considered an area of a cemetery, and that's why you are allowed to move them. So already we see that Tanakama here uses the numbers 4 and 8. Furthermore, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda omer mishum Rabbi Shimon ro'in etem sa'ayim ki'ilu enan v'ashar mistarefin me'arba amot ve'ad shemoneh. And here we have a disagreement, but it's not a disagreement about the 4 and 8. It's a disagreement about whether you can take out the ones in between. So we learn that Rabbi Shimon, the son of Yehuda, that's a different Rabbi Shimon, but he says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, that's our Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, says that if you find them very close together, then you can remove the middle ones, meaning make believe that they're not there, and then you look at the rest of them, and you see if those are between 4 and 8, then they do create an area of a cemetery. The one that was stuck in the middle there, let's say it's 3 right in a row, so let's say we remove one. Now, that one might have been put there incidentally, but wasn't supposed to be there. So that means it could be that this was a regular burial chamber, and then at some point, someone for some reason had to put another corpse and dug it inside between the others. But that doesn't make the rest of them not a cemetery chamber. So therefore, we can ignore the one that's very close right in the middle, and then still consider the rest of them. And if they are between 4 and 8, then that is a cemetery. What do we see from here? That Rabbi Shimon and Tanakama only disagree about whether you ignore the middle ones that are so close together. But they're in agreement that the basic dimensions are 4 and 8. And even Rabbi Shimon agrees with this. So this is another version of what Rabbi Shimon said. And the previous Mishnah that says 6 by 8, over here it says 4 by 8. And so this Rabbi Shimon, or could be this Tanakama, would be the author of the Mishnah in Masechet Nazir that we just quoted. Now, B'mai okimta ke Rabbi Shimon. So how did we decide who is the author of that Mishnah in Masechet Nazir? It's Rabbi Shimon. Well, if that's true, Masefa, bodek kemeno ulhalan esrim amma, mane, Rabbi Shimon esrim betarten havyan, Rabbanan temane sereh havyan. So the continuation of that Mishnah in Masechet Nazir says, if you do find 3 corpses in the proper ratio, then you have to assume that that is a chamber, and then you have to measure from there another 20 amot and check that whole radius of 20 amot. Well, now, who is the author of this part of the Mishnah that says 20 amot? Because if it's Rabbi Shimon, then it should be 22. And if it's Rabbanan, it should be only 18. Let's look at the picture to see that. If it's Rabbi Shimon, then we have to say maybe the 3 that you found were all the way on this edge of one of the chambers. So then you're going to have to count the 8, which is the length of this one, plus 6, plus another 8. Because maybe the next one that you'll find is all the way on the other side. And so that would make a total of 22. So you really have to would check a radius of 22 to make sure that you to make sure that you will find something if there is indeed another chamber here, and you find one that's 22 away. So it should be 22. So that Rabbi Shimon is more than the 20 that the Mishnah says. So maybe the continuation is in fact Rabbanan, even though the beginning is Rabbi Shimon, maybe the Sefa is Rabbanan. But according to Rabbanan, you have 6 here and 6 for the courtyard and another 6 here. And so that'll be a maximum of 18. And that's a maximum. It could be that you found one here and the next one right over here, which would be closer. But even the maximum is not more than 18 from end to end. And therefore, either you say 22 for Rabbi Shimon or 18 for Rabbanan, but what's 20? And the answer is Le'olam Rabbanan hi uchigon de b'dak be'alachsona. Oh, in fact, we'll follow Rabbanan, and we're saying that one examined on a diagonal, because if you look here, so we'll follow Rabbanan, but if you do straight across, that's true, you'll get to 18 only. But if you go to a diagonal, let's say a diagonal over here, so that's going to be more, about 7.2. And so that's going to add another 1, and then plus 6, plus another 6. So it's actually 19.2. But still, we'll round it up to 20. And so that's how we got 20. Hold on, if you're going to follow diagonals, then not only should you follow a diagonal here, but also in this chamber, you should follow a diagonal. And then it's going to be even more. It's going to have to be 22, because you're going to add another 1 amma and change for this one, and 1 amma for that one, or maybe you go from here all the way till here. But in any case, it's going that would be more than 20. So that still doesn't make sense in our Mishnah. And the answer is Chada ba'alachsona amdinan, tere ba'alachson la amdinan. The answer is that we only have to follow one of the chambers in a diagonal, not the other one. Because this chamber, we know for sure we found 3 somewhere in this chamber. I don't know if it's these 3 or these 3 or these 3 or whatever. So for this chamber, I want to make sure to use a diagonal where from my starting point, let's say I'm starting from this one, and that is one of the ones that we found. So maybe the next one is going to be on a diagonal, because for sure this is part of a chamber, and you want to make sure to find all the parts of the chamber. However, we don't even know if there is another chamber at all, or where it is. Maybe it's on this side, maybe it's in this direction. We don't even know where it is. So we don't have to go to that length, literally to go to that length to account for a diagonal in the second chamber. It's enough to account for a diagonal in the first chamber, and then from there we'll continue in a straight line. Now, this answer is somewhat problematic because it means that the beginning of the Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and then the Sefa about the diagonal is the opinion of Rabbanan. So now we have an alternate answer. Rav Shisha bered Rav Idi Amad leolam Rabbi Shimon hi v'hachab maskenan benifle. No, in fact, we can say that the entire Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. And here we're talking about where one of the chambers is for infants. And therefore, for infants, you don't need it to be 6 by 8, but only 6 by 6, because everything could be closer together. And so then you'd have one of the chambers for infants is only 6, and the next one is 6, that's 12, and the next one is 8, that's 20. So in fact, it could all be to be Shimon. We ask, wait, if one of the chambers is for newborns, for infants, then maybe the other one also is going to be. And then you have 6 plus 6 plus 6, that's only 18. And the answer is Chada benifle amrinan, tarte benifle la amrinan. No, we say only one of the chambers would be for infants. We're not going to say 2 of them for infants. It's true, there was some infant mortality, and so sometimes they would have a whole chamber just for infants, but you wouldn't have 2 because adults also die, and so you need space for adults. So you never make 2 chambers all for infants. So therefore, if we see that this one is for infants, okay, this one is 6, and then from there you only have to count 20. So the law of counting 20 would only be true if one of the chambers, one is for infants. We still have to assume the other one is for adults, and that's how we get to the number 20. We lastly ask a follow-up question on that Baraita, which said that according to the Rabbi Shimon, you can make believe the middle corpse is not there and then measure the rest of the ones around them. Whereas Tanakama did not say that you can do that. You have to take into account all of them that are there. So now we're going to find a contradiction. V'ramed Rabbanan ad Rabbanan. V'ramed Rabbi Shimon ad Rabbi Shimon. We're going to bring up a contradiction between the 2 statements of Rabbanan and also the 2 statements of Rabbi Shimon. Detanya, kerem hanatua al pachot me'arba amot. Rabbi Shimon omer eno kerem. Hachamim omrim hare ze kerem. Ve'ro'in et ha'imsa'im ke'ilu enan. The law of kilaim is that one is not allowed to plant vines and grains together in the same place. Now, if it's a single vine, then you just have to keep it far away, 1 amma away, or more, that's sufficient. However, if something is defined as a vineyard, then you have to keep the grains away 4 amot. So it makes a big difference if something is called a vineyard or not. So here we have a definition of a vineyard, is that the vines have to be 4 amot away from each other. in rows. That's the normal way to plant a vineyard. You put one row, and then you move 4 amot and plant the next row, so that there's room to work in between. There's room for the roots of those vines to get sustenance, and they're not overcrowded. However, if the space between the vines is less than that, then that's called an overcrowded area. So, is that considered a vineyard or not? Rabbi Shimon says it is not a vineyard. That's not the way you normally plant a vineyard. It's overcrowded, and therefore you still can't plant any single grain within 1 amah of any vine, but that more than 1 amah would be sufficient. You don't have to move it away 4 amot. However, Chachamim say it is a vineyard. What do? We consider the middle ones as if they're not there. So imagine, let's say they're two, each one is 2 feet apart, and another 2. The middle one, we just make believe it's not there, and we still consider it a vineyard because the other outer rows are 4 apart from each other. So we see there's a contradiction. Kashyat Rabbanan ad Rabbanan. The statements of Chachamim here that says you can ignore the middle ones goes against what the Tanakama said in the previous Braita regarding the corpses, that we do not ignore the middle ones. And the contradiction also between Rabbi Shimon, because here Rabbi Shimon says it's not a vineyard. We look at the middle ones, and before Rabbi Shimon, regarding the graves, says that we can ignore the middle ones. Shimon ad Rabbi Shimon lakashya. Hatam la nati inashe adata li akad. So there's no problem between the two statements of Rabbi Shimon. He can reconcile them as follows. Regarding the vineyard, a person does not plant with the intention of uprooting. It takes a lot of trouble to sit there and plant, and then you have to prepare the ground before and do all kinds of things. And so if the farmer put lots of vines there all together, then that means he meant to put them there. So this is not a mistake, and so therefore we cannot just ignore it. It means he planted a haphazard bunch of vines, and that's not called a vineyard. And we're not going to ignore it because, for whatever reason, the farmer wants them there. Whereas, regarding a grave, with regard to a grave area, sometimes it happens that it's Friday afternoon, just before sunset, and someone dies, and they need to quickly bury the person, and they don't have time to go to a new area and give a proper burial, and so they'll go and bury that person right between 2 other graves, and they'll, with the intention that at a later date they will rectify it, and for whatever reason they don't get to rectify it. So therefore, that's considered something temporary. They didn't mean it to be there. It was not purposeful. It was under shatadachak. It was under extenuating circumstances, and therefore we can in fact ignore it because it didn't mean to be there. And really, before that, there were just 2 graves that were properly spaced. Rabbanan ad Rabbanan nami la kasha hacha kevan de minval la mikre keber hatam memar amar heminahu de shapir udela shapir leheve lesibe. The 2 statements of the rabbis also we can reconcile with each other. When it comes to a graveyard, this is disgraceful for 3 corpses to be buried or more corpses to be buried all right next to each other without sufficient space between them. So because it's buried in such a way, and the cemetery is supposed to be a proper burial, and this is an improper burial. Therefore, we cannot call it a graveyard. It's just not called a graveyard, and that's why you would be allowed to move all of them. And we don't make believe the middle one is there. The middle one is there, and we just cannot call it a graveyard because it's disgraceful. It's actually be more honorable to move them so that they would be in a proper burial place with proper spacing. However, in the case of the kilayim, of the vines, what the farmer will say, you know what, I'll plant a lot of vines all around here, and they'll see those that flourish, I'll leave, they're flourishing, and those that don't, they'll be good. I'll cut them down for firewood later. And so since farmers normally do that, and so really they're only considering important the ones that are flourishing, and those are 4 amot apart, and the ones that are not flourishing because they're too close, he's going to end up uprooting. And so therefore those are considered just temporarily there, but aren't really part of the vineyard. The vineyard are the ones that he wants to keep, and those are spaced properly. So therefore, Rabbanan say there's a difference between the cemetery and the vineyard. In the vineyard, he plans to remove them, and they're really not part of the vineyard, and therefore, if it's spaced properly without those ones in the middle, then we can ignore them and make believe they are not there. Hadran Allah chamocher perot.